Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Leadership Exchange. This is Lupe Munoz.
And I'm Steve McKeon, and welcome to our episode today. Lupe, you want to tee it up and let folks know what we're going to talk about?
First of all, to all our listeners, we haven't been on for a while. I think we talked about this the first time this happened, and that, hey, sometimes life gets in the way. We've been extremely busy with other things, but we definitely are continuing to commit ourselves to this. With that said, Steve is going to start us off. You're going to start us off with the story, right, Steve? And the story is going to be within the context, we'll connect that context of Patrick Lencioni's book, which is called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. Extremely great book. I encourage everyone to read that book. It really talks about the dynamics of a team and some critical behaviors that are necessary to occur for a team to really be a great team. With that said, Steve, start us off, please.
Yeah, Lupe, I'm going to take us back to my time in the automotive industry. I was filling in as a shift manager for our driver line of products. And one of the things that we were struggling with was just, it was a new line and we're a new team and really trying to get the team to gel and start working on some of the key elements of being a high performance work team, right? So building the trust, making sure we had good lines of communication with the team. One of the things I did early on was identify the items that I felt we had complete control of and which ones we didn't, that were preventing us from being successful and hitting our production numbers. Obviously, safety was number one on there, that, we had to make sure everybody was safe at work and that, we were looking out after each other. Quality was our biggest hit, where we just were struggling with some of the quality product that we were trying to produce. And in that environment, I started really looking at what were the quality failures and which ones did we have direct control of, which ones were because this was a new process line. And by going through that exercise, we identified 25 items that were constantly preventing us from being successful, like not having the right parts at the right time, quality defects, another big piece of it. And then as we went through, I said, let's identify, and this was with the team, I said, let's identify the things that we think we have direct control of, and that if we do something slightly different, we can prevent that failure from occurring again. And so as the team got together, we quickly looked at this list of 25. It may have been 30 items, but we identified 15 items that we had full control of. When I say full control, it was things that we could do and influence based on standard work, following standard work, and our plans around when we weren't at standard. What was that reaction plan like? And so through the effort, I got the team together and then pulled the leads aside and said, okay, really need you guys to start working with your teams. And I want to go on the hourly boards and identify anytime one of these 30 items hit. We've got to make sure that we know if that was a cause, that it's on the board. And if it's new, make sure we note that it's a new item that we might need to address. And so a week into it, second shift was continuing to struggle the most. And I met with the lead. The lead in this case would have been someone at a supervisor level. And I asked him, I said, hey, what's going on? What are these issues? Let's go take a look at the board. So we walked over to the board from the shift before, and we looked through the list, and there were 17 items on the shift list that prevented them from being successful. They were really good about documenting why they weren't successful. But as we read through them, I started looking at, hey, which ones are things that were in our control? And it was crazy. The majority of the items identified by the team were in our control. We weren't either following standard work. We didn't follow the escalation plan. We allowed communication and handoffs to break down. So it was all stuff that we could control. And so I turned to the supervisor and, I asked him, I said, hey, what's going on here? Because these were things we just talked about last week. We all agreed these were in our control, and yet The other teams have really been able to close the gap on having so many, and you've got by far the vast majority. And so one of the things he told me was that, well, he really was trying to be that servant leader, and didn't want to, because his team was reporting information that in the past they may have not been as willing to report. He didn't want to detour them from reporting. I said, okay. And then what else? And we identified a couple things on the board. I said, why would we allow this condition to exist on the next shift? And it all came down to the fact that this individual did not like conflict, did not like to hold his team accountable to their performance. He felt like they would not like him if he did, and that he was really more worried about himself, I think, than the performance of the team. And so we talked about that. I said, hey, think about this, because what you're saying is that it's okay for your team to continue to have no accountability for not following your standard work, not following escalation plans, breakdowns in communication, and they will never get better. It won't get better unless we call it out and we hold people accountable. And he would just really struggle with that, because he really felt that he needed to be everybody's friend. And what he didn't realize was that his team really did not have a lot of respect for him because of that. They were wanting him to hold the team accountable for those items that they could control. And once we got there, once everybody on that team kind of figured it out that, hey, we're going to hold each other accountable, these are the things that are within our control, he and his team really started to grow. And so, that's the story I want to start off with, Lupe. It really kind of ties into some of the things that you and I have talked about in recent weeks.
Yeah, Steve, that is something that is, I would say, I've seen a lot in young leaders. When I mean young, I don't mean age. I'm talking about like first-time leaders, like their experience level, leading people. Especially for our listeners, you listen to us talk about servant leadership and what that means. But I've seen it taken to the extreme. And I feel like the example you've given us, Steve, is one where there's a leader that mistakens being a servant leader with, hey, I want to be people's best friend. I don't want to get people upset at me. I'm supposed to be serving them. And that's not quite exactly the way I think it's meant. I think, Simon Sinek said it really well during he was speaking to a group, and he explained that being a servant leader is sort of like, or being a good leader is sort of like being a good parent. So as a parent, I do not believe in the thought of, hey, as a parent, I want to be my kid's best friend, only because I feel like it's going to have some moments like a best friend. You share some really great memories, and, you want to trust and talk about anything as a parent. But I don't think that a best friend always is necessarily going to look out for what's best for you. And especially like as you're growing up to be an adult, and even past being an adult, growing up to be just a more mature adult. I think part of being a good leader and responsible leader is you have to be able to hold the team accountable and not tolerate some of the 5 dysfunctions that Lencioni talks about in his book. And I think that is part of why some leaders get caught up in that trap of, well, I'm supposed to be a servant leader. I think that means that I don't need to get people upset at me. I'm a new leader and I want to build trust with them. But the thing is, the trust is not around, hey, I trust that you're not going to hold me accountable. The trust is around that you have good intentions. You mean well. As a person and as a leader, you want what's best for us. And sometimes what's best for us is to hold us accountable. And some teams, as you mentioned, the team that you're talking about, some teams will lose respect for a leader because of that, especially a new leader coming on board. There is a point where you need to hold people accountable. It may not be the first few days, but maybe it is. If it's a safety item, for example, you want to set the tone with the team. And so you want to make sure, hey, this is not acceptable. You're not going to start, letting people go or writing people up right away. But you are going to start having conversations around, hey, like this is not really a good behavior. You're not wearing your PPE. You're not following some other safety rules. This is really important to me, and this is why. But you don't want to necessarily look the other way because you don't want to set that tone, like you said. The expectations start to set in that these types of things are okay. And as a servant leader, I think you have to also sometimes be the bad guy, if you will, not in a negative way, but in a way that maybe not be the most popular thing. I think Colin Powell once said that something to the effect of leadership is it's lonely, and that I think that's part of it is because sometimes you have to make the unpopular decision for a team.
Yeah, Lupe, those are all really good points. And, I can reflect on this one case again and kind of the conditions that were in place right before this occurred. And so the individual I'm talking about was a new supervisor to that team, but he grew out of that team. Even though that team was formed, it was a fairly new production line. Most of those people were tenured within that organization, so they knew each other from working on other parts of that facility. And I think for him, one of the things that was really difficult in that move, and that happens to a lot of, like you said, new leaders when you are promoted within your organization, and now people that were your peers are now reporting in to you. It becomes tough because you want to maintain those relationships. And to the point that you made, Lupe, or the Colin Powell quote, is that unfortunately the career advancement, there is that separation that is going to have to happen. And I've had that in my own career path where I've had friends that were very close to me and and still are really good friends, by the way. But when the conditions changed in our work relationship, I did have to find some separation because without it, then there's the perception of favoritism. There's the perception of no accountability or limited accountability. And you'll never get the team operating the way you need to get because there's no trust, right? So it goes right back to Lencioni, that first part of the pyramid, and the importance of trust and kind of working through that. The other thing, and we touched on it lightly in another episode, but it really ties back to some of Lencioni's teaching, is the fear of conflict. So whether it's between two peers in the organization or even the supervisor and their team, sometimes that fear of conflict really helps foster this lack of commitment and avoidance of accountability. Identifying those things as a new leader, being set up so you're aware of them, but also that how to work through them. And a lot of it is just good old-fashioned open communication, letting the team know that, especially when you're new, hey, I'm not going to be perfect at this. Appreciate I used to do X, Y, and Z side by side with you. My roles change, and I'm committed to support what you're going to be doing, and that's really my new role. And so I think those are things that new leaders need to understand moving into their next opportunity, their next journey.
Whenever you have someone that gets elevated and becomes a supervisor, the leader, whatever title you want to use, it with people that were peers at one point, that's a whole another layer of challenges that presents itself to that leader. And I think what you're saying is spot on, Steve, around what leaders need to be thinking about. But tying back to Lencioni's model, the book is great. It's a story about a leader that is put in a position to lead a team for a company. And in the book, the pyramid or the triangle is introduced to the team and to the reader for the 5 behaviors that are critical for a team. So they can be dysfunctions or they can be very functional, and therefore the team can be very successful. So if you draw your triangle at the very bottom, the base is trust. Then as you work your way up in layers, it's conflict, commitment, accountability, and results. So the gist of this model, at least my interpretation, is that all these things have to happen for you to have an effective team. You have to have results. You have to know what those results are. They need to be tied to everyone's success. Everyone needs to be accountable, be committed to those results as a team, as an overall, not be selfish, being selfless and focus on the priorities of the team and thinking of things in the big picture of the team, not just my department or my group. And there's got to be conflict, because without conflict, quality conflict, not negative conflict. We talked about this, we called it good conflict, necessary conflict in our previous episodes. I think one of the key that Lencioni talks about is conflict needs to be around everyone having an opportunity to be listened to their opinion of something, getting it out there, being able to put yourself in that person's shoes and trying to, seeking to understand, but then in the end, making a decision as a team.
Yeah.
Whether it's by consensus or whether it's by the main leader hears everyone out and makes a decision, whatever that method may be. The key is, though, everyone speaks their mind in a safe environment. They can be honest, but they're all heard on the team. And by that happening, the commitment can exist, at least commitment to, hey, I said my part. It wasn't what everyone else agreed on, but that's okay, because I had an opportunity to try and persuade everybody.
Yeah, Lupe, I think it's one of the best leadership books out there that I've read, and I'm a big fan of Lencioni's work and his insight into a lot of the relationships and just what I also like to think of as performance-based work environment, and how being a servant leader fits into all that. I think is key, and from my standpoint, I think that would make a great episode for you and I to talk about on our next podcast. So why don't we go ahead and wind this one down? Thank everybody for their time. This is Steve McKeon.
And this is Lupe Munoz. And this is the Leadership Exchange. Thanks for listening.